Years ago, in the silent days, I used to write with the camera. Well, I never had anything prepared, you see. I would get on a set and would start early in the cold morning. And then you'd start, and you'd get excited, and out of excitement would come invention.
January 6, 1928, the world premiere of the Circus at the Strand Theatre in New York. Though motion pictures were on the threshold of the talkie revolution, the film's success was comparable to that of the Gold Rush. The Los Angeles premiere took place 3 weeks later at Grauman's Chinese Theatre. The Circus remained invisible for almost 4 decades before Chaplin decided to re-release it in 1969 in a restored version complete with a new score of his own composition. In his autobiography, Chaplin never so much as mentions the Circus, which demanded 2 years of exhausting work. Its production was fraught with difficulties and shooting was suspended several times. Of all Chaplin's silent films, The Circus undoubtedly remains the most underrated, and a film that cries out for rediscovery. Chaplin knew nothing about filmmaking when Mack Sennett hired him for Keystone, but just about everything remained to be invented.
Sennett's manner of working had seemed right. His remark that very first day at the studio, "We have no scenario, we get an idea, then follow the natural sequence of events," had stimulated my imagination.
Mack Sennett had seen Chaplin perform as a member of Fred Karno's famous British Music Hall Company. The programs were made up of short pantomime sketches which followed one another at a frenetic pace, heavily influencing slapstick film comedy. British Music Hall was the quintessential art form of the masses. The licensing laws of the 18th century had forbidden the performance of plays with dialogue except on the stages of the Theatres Royal. The pantomime artists of the Carnot shows were the direct descendants of the Commedia dell'arte in that they could not speak. The music hall was the people's art, characterized by a certain penchant for mockery of the ruling class. A Night in the Show is the only film in which we can see sketches as they were performed in a Carnot revue. In it, Chaplin plays a double role, that of a troublesome spectator in the balcony and a drunken socialite in the orchestra.
The Carnot revues preserved all the forms and traditions of pantomime. Acrobatics, juggling, tumbling, miming, broad slapstick, song, dance and burlesque. Their characters included drunks coming home, bicycle snatchers, pool room sharks, punch-drunk boxers, music hall hams, magicians, and so on.
The drunkard impersonations that earned Chaplin success in the Carnot tours were part of the traditional pantomime repertory. In a French film made in 1911, we see the mime Severin in an almost Chaplin-esque comedy routine. Chaplin's roots lay here.
With each succeeding comedy, the tramp was growing more complex. Sentiment was beginning to percolate through the character. This became a problem because he was bound by the limits of slapstick. The solution came when I thought of the tramp as a sort of Pierrot.
What is a good gag? In a film made in 1900, we see the old William Tell routine. In 1918, Chaplin himself would shoot a variation of this gag with the famous British comedian Harry Lauder, in which he replaced the crossbow with a Colt 45. In fact, the film was never released or even finished. But he would go back to the idea with the sad old clown played by Henry Bergman. He undoubtedly thought that the problem lay in the kind of fruit used, so he replaced the apple with a banana. Suddenly, a tired gag was rejuvenated, and Chaplin transformed it into a pure nonsense sketch. In October 1925, Chaplin returned to Los Angeles after spending 2 months in New York and went to work at his studios on La Brea Avenue, which he'd had built in late 1917. For Chaplin, the La Brea studio symbolized his independence. Nostalgic for his native England, he'd had the studio offices designed as a row of old English cottages. In his studio, production methods were those of the artisan. The presence of a small, permanent crew gave Chaplin the flexibility he required to move back and forth between work on his script, shooting, and editing. Following Chaplin's indications, Danny Hall would do work sketches of the future sets. These art director's sketches were very similar to the modern-day storyboard and showed how Chaplin, even before beginning to work out his scenario, already had a firm idea of certain scenes. During the construction of the sets, Chaplin and his assistant Harry Crocker went off to work on the scenario. At the time, Chaplin didn't write a real scenario. For the Circus, he went back to the basic story idea he'd used in a famous short, The Vagabond, in which Charlie comes to the aid of a young girl brutalized by a villainous gypsy chief. In The Circus, the tramp, pursued by the police for a theft he didn't commit, is hired by the proprietor of a traveling circus. In both films, we find the same romantic triangle and the theme of Charlie's thwarted romance with the heroine. Chaplin would always remain nostalgic for this golden age of silent cinema when he wrote with a camera.
Everything was so free and easy. No literature, no authors. All we had was an idea on which to build gags. Then we would work out the story as we went along.
Belgrade, December 28, 2002. Emir Kusturica has called for a pause in the shooting of his film Hungry Heart to take stock of his work. Kusturica's films have always displayed a fondness for farcical comedy. Underground and Time of the Gypsies, in particular, contain echoes of a Chaplin-esque universe. On this night, he watched The Circus in a room of the Hotel Moscow.
As usual, I start my movie and then I discover during the shoot that whatever was on the paper is not enough, it's not sufficient to what I feel at that moment when I'm building or imposing my film structure for the future. So basically, what made Chaplin cinema extremely interesting among a million other things is basically that he was doing his films as almost as a writer when he starts writing his novel. He was doing movies from 1 year to 2 years. And one of the reasons why his movies are so appealing and so strong is that basically he was really structuring, and he was doing, was one of the architects of cinema.
I did not have to read books to know that the theme of life is conflict and pain. For me, pantomime was a universal means of communication. With pantomime, I can say everything, move from farce to pathos, from comedy to tragedy, with much less effort than words would involve.
Cinema is, before anything, space. How you enter the scene, how you exit the scene, how you do all these trivial things that the viewer and the audience do not need to know. He was, I would say, inventing the life, another life. And that's why this cinema was so big, and they used to say bigger than life. What this man brought to cinema, the biggest innovation that he brought to cinema, basically patent that he brought, is how somebody invades the space. If you look today's cinema, which I somehow compare to the past and to his cinema, you don't need the words. Even if in the speaking movies that he's made afterwards, you mostly had, and the biggest quality of this was how he was managing the space.
The film opens with an extraordinary shot that works on the accumulation of circular shapes and gives the action its special light. After an iris-out effect, punctuated by a crash of cymbals, the rider is literally ejected from the flat surface of the hoop into a three-dimensional universe, which will become the main stage of this human comedy. This tear reveals the circus ring and the smiling rider concluding her act to take her bows to the audience. In this extremely concise exposition, Chaplin works towards contrast and brings the scene to an unusually violent climax.
A very good professor who told us that basically the best part of structure in cinema comes from the circus, because circus is basically created in the circle in which you have many elements, but the way they do the program is very much like the way you have to think about viewers when you start making a cinema. And he was not pretentious intellectual. He was really somebody who extended his emotions and the vision of the life through the cinema to the highest possible points.
The genesis of the circus was described by Chaplin to actor Henry Bergman, who played the old clown in the film.
Henry, I have an idea. I would like to do a gag placing me in a position I can't get away from for some reason. I'm on a high place troubled by something else, monkeys or things that came to me, and I can't get away from them.
The situation takes on a metaphorical value. Chaplin, at the height of his fame, is literally walking on a tightrope. This central idea for the film is a perfect blend of genre in which the slavistic comedy and suspense overlap. During the month of February 1926, Chaplin shot more than 700 takes for this one scene alone.
But this is what makes cinema great, you know? Apparently he comes to a solution that nobody could expect, that rope doesn't exist anymore as the element. And this is what cinema needs to be, you know? And how much time he spent to come to this. This is what right now I'm trying to do. I start playing with one element, but then I find another 5, and then it's endless. And then the movie comes so late that financiers are screaming, silently screaming. Once you start making movies, if you do, then you have to think about how to get your characters out of gravity. And this is very typical for this, which is basically the circus aim. All what you see, you want to see somehow not being linked to the heavy real life that you have as a reality. Nothing is real in cinema. If you look into his movie, there is no one segment of reality that was just transferred.
On September 28th, a fire swept through the studio. The stills photographer snapped this image of a dismayed Chaplin contemplating the ruins. As rebuilding would take several weeks, Chaplin quickly had a restaurant set erected. This probably improvised sequence was cut in the final editing. Kevin Brownlow and David Gill reconstituted the montage in their documentary, Unknown Chaplin. The sequence opens with an exterior shot which was filmed after the rebuilding of the sets. The tramp comes to the rider's trailer to invite her out to a restaurant. As he waits for her, he examines a rake which he carelessly throws to the ground. The master shot introduces several variants. Charlie overconfidently opens the door of his trailer and pushes away with his foot a circus hand sitting on the steps. The master shot is conceived to allow for an insert shot in which Myrna, who is not quite ready, asks him to wait. These shots have a lot to teach us. They reveal not only Chaplin's shooting methods, but also his sense of improvisation and his virtually obsessional concern with exhausting all the possibilities of a scene. The use of the rake is a perfect example of Chaplin's art. Here, he uses an apparently banal object to dramatize his obsession with competing with Rex, the tightrope walker who is his romantic rival. This magnificent idea never made it into the completed film. Instead, we have a more conventional but no less effective scene in which Charlie practices the tightrope for an imaginary audience before being surprised by the girl's father. Among the discarded footage of this sequence is a superb traveling shot in which Charlie, with Myrna on his arm, as if they were a real couple, stroll down Sunset Boulevard, which at the time still retained a pleasantly rural look. The chance meeting with Rex upsets his plans for an intimate lunch with the girl. But as Charlie and Myrna enter the restaurant arm in arm, Rex uses his good manners to advantage. Chaplin comes up with a variety of actions which he continually fine-tunes. In the first take, when the person on the right kicks Charlie's chair out from under him, Rex steps in to take his defense. The waiter tells them that the prankster is in fact a feared prizefighter. But in the next take, Chaplin has subtly modified the scene. Rex doesn't step in and is more interested in Myrna and the menu the waiter gives them, reinforcing the idea that they are the real couple, while the tramp is showered with pieces of sugar. This purely comic scene ends in a punch-up in which Rex gets the upper hand. In 2 weeks, Chaplin shot several thousand feet of film. He often spoke of his obsession with perfection.
Interviewers have asked me how I get ideas for pictures, and to this day I'm not able to answer satisfactorily. Over the years, I've discovered that ideas come through an intense desire for them. How does one get ideas? By sheer perseverance to the point of madness.
On December 5th, 1926, the production report showed that the shooting was suspended. Chaplin's divorce with Lita Gray had become a waking nightmare. Women's associations had launched a campaign calling for the boycotting of Chaplin's films. Chaplin left Los Angeles to stay with his lawyer in New York, but not before taking the precaution of having the negative for the circus removed to a safe place. His studio was placed under guard. It was 6 months later, in October 1927, that Chaplin would shoot the final exteriors in Glendale.
Yeah, this is this mythical Charlie is leaving. But Circle is the biggest miracle, basically. Look at now, Circle. A circle that closes, a circle that he just left. It is just like juggling in the circus. That's what our work is. Trying to make somebody believe into unbelievable and trying to do things that just transfer people into this your own transcendental world in which, as much as you juggle with the known elements, in which Circle in this one shows that basically not explaining but just bringing the people into the miracles is what we do.